special things I compile, each one there to make you smile on a rainy day. They can say it all sounds crazy. They can say we've lost our minds. I don't care if they call us crazy. Run away to a world that we design.
Every night I lie in bed, the brightest colors fill my head. A million dreams keeping me awake. I think of what the world could be, a vision of the one I see. A million dreams is all it's gonna take. A million dreams for the world.
Well, good morning. I want to thank you for taking a chance. I'm sure that some of you have seen me wander around. I know that there have been some mutterings about the priest that's here and why is he here and what's going on, and I want to assure you I'm not a priest. I am a pastoral intern. My name is Jason Mills. I am a student at the United Lutheran Seminary in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, part of a two-campus Lutheran merging with a campus in Philadelphia. And part of my work as a theological student and working on my Master's of Divinity has been kind of deconstructing the church experience for Lutherans, which some of you may know is the widest denomination in this nation. And so having me talk about unconscious bias is kind of like the church making reparations for all of the trouble that it's caused in the last 2,000 plus years. And so there's a very unique juxtaposition that I kind of wanted to capitalize on while I was here. So my military background, I am a 21-year Navy veteran. I retired 3 years ago as a senior chief cryptologic linguist. Thank you. I was a Russian, and I was often referred to as a tyrant. So this is a very interesting opportunity for me to kind of shed a little bit of that. The person that is giggling back here in this row used to be one of my sailors. Thank you, Cody, for being here. So I'd like to just go ahead and give us an opportunity to address the bias that is in the room right now by asking, for those of you who served in the Army, to please raise your hand. I'm just trying to gauge as to where all my problem children are. For those of you who were former Marines, or are former Marines? Thank you. Air Force? I expect you guys to be very quiet and well-behaved. And my sailors, of course. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. My hope today is that I will invite you into a conversation that will go far beyond what we discuss and what is presented to you today. Unconscious bias is kind of an emerging school of thought within the last decade. It invites us into a deconstruction of our own experiences and selves, whether from birth on or from military service on. I know in the last 3 years, from the time that I retired, there has been a great opportunity for me to really kind of take apart a lot of those experiences that I had in the Navy that led me to believe that I was a very woke and liberal individual, and really challenge those understandings, specifically as I started to serve a very homogenous group of people and understanding what it means to be a homogenous group in this day and age in our 21st century. And so my hope is that we'll be able to have a conversation. And because this is being recorded, I know that there's a little bit of anxiety about that. But I promise you, to the extent that I can make possible, this is a safe space. I also want to challenge each of you in this sense of soul, to really focusing on that leadership aspect of inviting people into conversation. There are going to be some preconceived notions, some prejudices that may come out during our conversation in the next 55 minutes. And rather than view those as barriers, I'd like to kind of take this opportunity to really work through the deconstruction of whatever biases we came into this room with and kind of put that into practice together. And of course, I will moderate that to the extent possible. Now, because this is being recorded and because we definitely want your questions, I have a portable microphone up here that I'd like to just kind of pass around as things happen. So please just raise your hand as a question pops into your mind. This is an opportunity for us to just kind of start unwrapping some things and really look at how we can take this either back to our chapters, back to our schools, or back to our lives in a post-graduation reality. So, what is unconscious bias? Does anybody have an idea? Has anybody thought about unconscious bias before? Thought about it? Do you want to give us an opportunity to hear your preconceived notions? Are you going to turn this on, Josh? Got it. Thank you.
Well, really it is just preconceived notions that you were either raised with or been around and part of for different groups that you run into throughout your lifetime.
Awesome. So. Thank you, Joshua. If you just want to set it on that first chair, that would be great. So preconceived notions, a lot of us would kind of refer to those as prejudices, things that we have been nurtured to understand throughout our lives. A lot of those things can be as simple as, I personally don't like octopus sushi. I find it extremely discomforting to have something sucking on my tongue as I'm trying to eat it. And so that is a very mild bias that I carry. And so I don't even think about when I look at a sushi menu as to whether or not I want to order octopus. And so it's become an unconscious thought at this point. It's just something that I shy away from. Some of the harder ones, I think, have really come to the national and societal discussion in our lives, certainly around critical race theory, the Black Lives Matter movement, and this sense of inclusion and diversity in the workforce. I'm sure that many of you have gone through some diversity training within the last 3 to 5 years. I know that even at a theological level, it's something that we have to do annually. And a lot of times, specifically for those of us who have a military background and have experienced a high level of diversity in those things that we have done with the military, it's a hard pill to swallow, specifically when the questions are so inane that it's like, how do people not get this? How is this something that is still confusing for so many? Because many of us have worked with people from all walks of life through our military career, regardless of how long that was. And so kind of working through the common understanding that these biases is something that we have nurtured as a society for so long is a really hard pill for us to swallow. And so a lot of those, the more harmful ones, come to the idea that probably a lot of you have perceived this collar when I was walking around these last couple of days. Many have been harmed by the church and many shy away from the church, and this is not meant to be a come back to church talk, I promise. But it was an intentional opportunity for me to explore the biases that might come with anybody's interactions with me, which have been few and far between, and I knew that was going to happen. And so what are some biases that we carry specifically because of what someone looks like? And that's really what it comes down to, how we begin to deconstruct those things. What are the things that we have been taught or experienced in our lives that have really brought us into this sense of protecting ourselves against clergy, protecting ourselves from, say, someone in a Marine uniform, or looking at how we deal with civilians specifically. How many of you have been out of the military for more than 2 years? Thank you. So in my last 3 years, I definitely left the military. Now, after 21 years of indoctrination, this may have been a much deeper sense for me than it may have been for any of you who served less than 21 years. I viewed civilians with disdain. Anybody else? Thank you. You can be honest here, I promise. I'm not going to come after you. I found the thanks that I got from civilians to be really empty because there was no opportunity for shared experience in that. And it was something that I struggled with for at least the first 2 years after I left the military, because it was this deeply ingrained sense of camaraderie that I had through service that I was unable to approach civilians with any sense of respect, specifically those who had not served, and ended up kind of sitting in this place of isolation because I was refusing an opportunity to really gain a level of experience to what they may have felt as a civilian person seeking the approval or thanks of a military member. And so that was an unconscious bias that had been nurtured in me through my 21 years of service. And that one can be harmful. That's the kind of thing specifically for somebody who is working from a level of service in the military side into a level of service on the civilian side that can be a barrier to my new professional success. I mean, it's very hard for a person that has decided to dedicate themselves to a new layer of service in life as a clergy member or as a church leader or as a leader in any kind of realm to say, I don't really like civilians. Because there are a lot more civilians than there are veterans, right? And so there's a much higher sense of running into a civilian than there ever would be running into a military member. Now, again, that one is a lowball kind of unconscious bias. The ones that you might be more interested in deconstructing are those that come with certainly the LGBTQIA+ community and our BIPOC siblings. Both veteran and civilian, and how our nation right now as a society and as a culture, we are really having a really hard time understanding what it means to be inclusive and diversity focused. Specifically when it comes to the phrases of all lives matter as it relates directly to Black Lives Matter, or I don't see color, both of which are extremely harmful things to say. And so I just want to kind of segue a little bit too. I was supposed to have a partner in this, a former sailor of mine, petty officer, who is still a sailor. I am not. He is still a sailor. Petty Officer Armando Man McAfee Swank was supposed to be here, but his partner came down with COVID just 2 weeks ago, and so he was unable to join us today. And he is a proud member not just of the Navy, but also of the queer community. And we were going to kind of have more of a paneled discussion regarding what that looked like for us when we first met about 6 years ago. A white male authority figure who suffers from a great sense of imposter syndrome. And in the event that you were confused as to who that was, that's me. And then a young, queer, BIPOC sailor who is checking into my department for the first time. And so I don't intend on speaking for Armando, but I will tell you from my part what that 16 years of service had led me into when meeting him for the first time. So I joined the Navy in 1998. I am from an upper middle class family. Both of my parents worked. I have spent a lot of time this last summer through a chaplaincy experience in Austin, Texas, kind of working on this deconstruction of this narrative. And so a lot of it is still fresh. So please forgive me if I stumble or tell awkward parts of this story, as this will be the first time I do so publicly. So upper middle class upbringing, mostly white high school, very rural high school in the western part of Lansing, Michigan. That is where I am from. So I actually grew up in the inner city of Lansing in a very diverse neighborhood. And my parents had the privilege to move me and my two brothers out of that neighborhood when it became too dangerous. And our middle school and high school experiences were looking fairly bleak into a more rural and, for us, a very homogenous upbringing. And so I didn't really deal with race, racism or anti-racism at all during that period of time. And I would think that probably most of the nation, if you were white at that point, probably didn't have to deal with it at all. And that was just part of our privileged upbringing. When we moved, I had a fairly typical high school experience where I skipped school more than I was in it, which is what, of course, led me to the Navy. having the motivation to do great things, but certainly not the experience of having accomplished any up to that point. When I joined the Navy, I went to DLI in Monterey, California, and at that time was also a majority white experience. And so I didn't have the opportunity to really experience or kind of look at what diversity as far as cultures and race really meant until I actually got to my first duty station in Hawaii in the year of our Lord 2000. I struggled hardcore in Monterey. I was definitely what you might consider a typical white mediocre male. Looking at what it meant to be a sailor and really relying on my gift of gab and the opportunity to talk myself out of situations and certainly kind of leaning into that majority standing in that place, certainly speaking to leaders that looked like me, that acted like me, and certainly perpetuated a lot of the stereotypes that I had been taught and nurtured throughout most of my life and continue to underscore those things as correct. So when I finally got to Hawaii, that was really my first experience of being in a multicultural, diverse place. And it actually wasn't in the military that I began to question everything that I knew. I was married at the time to an Air Force service member. And we lived at Barbers Point. I don't know how many of you are familiar, which is a former naval air base. And at that time had been shut down and was just a Coast Guard air station. And so we were out in town. And for any of you that were, anybody stationed in Hawaii? Had been stationed in Hawaii? When were you there?
86 to 9.
Did they have, so 86 to 89, that is a really long time ago, and bless you for still being here. The Kama'aina cards, was that a thing back then? Kama'aina cards? Probably not. Okay, so a Kama'aina card in the early 2000s was basically a discount card that they gave to all of the military members at that time because the cost of living in Hawaii had skyrocketed at that point. I mean, it was like $6 for a gallon of milk kind of stuff. And of course, being a young E4, we were certainly going to take as many advantages of any discounts we could get no matter what. So we decided to go see a movie out in town. Now, I did not know what Kama'aina meant in Hawaiian. It means hometown. And so we're out in public and getting tickets for this film. And I ask for the Kama'aina discount, at which point I produce my card. And of course, there are Native Hawaiians behind me. It was not a pleasant experience to learn what that word meant to those that it was actually a title for. And rightfully so. I was ignorant, and I was asking for a discount that absolutely should have been given to those who were actually local, who were certainly part of an oppressed society in the microcosm that is the Kingdom of Hawaii. And it got me thinking at that moment, what is it that makes me so great that I deserve this card over somebody who actually has decided to continue living here because they have Native roots, because there are generations that have gone before them that stood for many and great things for the legacy that is the Kingdom of Hawaii. And it was at that moment that I began to really kind of understand what it meant to be diverse, what it meant to be inclusive, and how much work I had to do in an effort to really kind of grow into this better understanding of what it was like to be a white male in this society, lifting up voices that are not my own. And so I started working with, at that time, my division, and kind of just sharing that story, sharing that experience. And I will tell you that that went so far. I was really surprised by the opportunity that I was given at that moment to lift up those voices and that experience in an effort to really kind of bring to the fore this understanding of what it meant to be in this place in Hawaii as the military, and certainly what that meant for a state that had long viewed the military as an occupying force since 1889, I believe, with the overthrow of their monarchy. And so a lot of unconscious bias, a lot of that is looking at your experiences and understanding where we as individuals have gone wrong, juxtaposed to where as a society we continue to move incorrectly. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of opportunity to really kind of unwrap and unravel these things that we have been taught, these things that have been underscored. And this is, again, this is just a beginning. This is an invitation into a conversation. This is an invitation into an opportunity to really look at how unconscious bias shapes how it is that we deal with those around us, and certainly how we lead and how we invite people into opportunity through continued service and continued understanding of what that bias causes us to do. And so, I could talk more. I talk a lot on Sundays. But I'd like to hear, I would like to hear some, if anybody, is this something that's new for you? Certainly our siblings of color have been the subject of, the deconstruction of unconscious bias, and certainly the oppression continues because of where unconscious bias continues to play a part in how we try to live together as a society. And I would like to invite some stories from you guys about how it has affected you. Maybe when you became aware that unconscious bias was a thing that we needed to work on as a society, or even as a microcosm of society, certainly as veterans. And again, I think that it's really important to understand that we have a very different perspective as veterans for what that means, specifically those who have served probably within the last 15 years. For me, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was a huge aspect of the beginning part of my service. And I grew up with a lesbian grandmother. Now, we didn't talk about it. It was just Grandma and Aunt Jane, and whenever we were there, they happened to share the same bedroom. Of course, when I became much older, I began to understand, well, Aunt Jane doesn't have clothes anywhere else in the house. And so when the church, the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, when they accepted our queer siblings as clergy in 2009, that response, as I'm sure many of you who were watching the news at that time, that super split response to that decision was really troubling because I didn't understand why that was a problem, having grown up in this environment. And then I realized that because we never talked about it, of course I would never understand what the opposing views were. And so this is an opportunity for us in this safe space to invite one another in to those experiences of what unconscious bias means, or how it has affected us as veterans, or as students, or as now former service members who are trying to continue to assimilate into a society that we might still be grappling with, trying to understand. So would anybody like to share? Please, Tiana. The microphone's up here on this front.
Is it still on? Yeah, it is. So I'm going to share a story about how you can be a victim of unconscious bias, but also still perpetuate it at the same time. So I'm also an alumna of Monterey, of DLI.
Yes.
And I went to DLI, and it was phenomenal. And I was very young, 18 to 20. And at the time, I was the only brown female in my class, and there was only one black male in the class. Mm-hmm. So there was 18 of us. There was only 2 of us that kind of shared that experience. And I was really too young to kind of understand how that really affected me, how there was no females who kind of understood how it did take me that extra 5 minutes to do my bun, because my hair is a lot, okay? I bought this hair, but my real hair is a lot. Laughing right here, they understand. But that extra time to do my bun, to get it just as tight and smooth as others, really wasn't shared. That was something that was like, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, you're moving so slow. And so it's something as simple as that. But I was also a perpetuator at this time because my mom was very, very homophobic. She used to say, there's a man for every woman and a woman for every man, so I don't see why you would have to be gay. So then when I go to Monterey, I'm in California, and I'm not using pronouns right, I'm not really understanding, and I'm perpetuating this. And it took until I had a transgender roommate, Emma, lovely roommate, changed my life. But when we started, I would say, well, can I get the bigger closet because I'm a girl? Can I do this because I'm a girl? So at the same time, I was still perpetuating and not accepting her identity and doing the same exact thing that was problematic to me when I was in Monterey, not accepting the identity that she was living by. So even though you can be a victim of the unconscious bias, you can still perpetuate it, but you can learn and change. And with Emma helped me change, and Emma helped me become a better person, and now I'm super ally of the LGBTQIA community, and you can grow and change, and this is an opportunity to learn and change with that. So
thank you, Tiana. Thank you. Yeah, it is really interesting when I look back on my 21 years in the true Air Force fashion, to piggyback on what Tiana said, to be able to identify those voices and those people in my life that have really given me an opportunity to explore and deconstruct those thoughts and prejudices that I have walked into a room with. And so thank you for highlighting that. And I am thankful for you also that Emma came into your life. That's great. Would anybody else like to share? Please, thank you. Just line up, it's fine. We'll get there together.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Pastor Brewster.
You're Cody.
Cody, yeah, that too. It's weird. This is my first time at any kind of professional conference or, this is the first time I've ever really publicly talked about this, so I apologize for my nerves. Over the last several years, I have been reflecting a lot about my own unconscious biases that I've had growing up in a very predominantly white community. My father was an MA in the Navy. Sorry, I don't know why that's relevant. Anyways, so the thing I just thought about sitting here, and that I've been grappling with myself. I have two sisters. They're about 8 years younger than me, right? So I'm already out, and I'm doing my Navy thing. I'm out away from them, and they're going to high school. And they start dating, right? And I'm like, I see pictures, and I'm like, okay, cool, they're dating, whatever. I should not be involved with that, right? But they start dating a black gentleman in their high school. And I don't know why, but I'm protective. I'm thinking things that, thinking about it now, don't make any damn sense. I'm sorry, that's recording. It doesn't make any sense
I should have
when
warned
you
you
actually
to,
think
like,
about it.
swearing is fine and acceptable.
All right,
It's normal speech.
And at the same time, there's also the other aspect of it where, like I have children, and I don't have a daughter yet, even though I want one, where I think it's common in media and movies and television where, say, the daughter comes, or the son comes over to pick up your daughter for a date, right? And the media and everything wants to say, oh, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to give him a talk and I'm going to be cleaning my gun and I'm going to put the fear in him. How would it feel to have your son, have that same treatment? And that's also an unconscious bias I think we have in gender roles, where why are we perpetuating this, I'm not really sure the words here.
Prejudice?
This
Understanding?
prejudice against why does a male have to be talked to like that? Why does a daughter have to be protected like that? And there are some valid reasons, but that's just an extreme that doesn't make any sense and should not be perpetuated. I think that's all I have.
Cool. Thank you, Cody. Thank you. Before you come up, if I may, because I have the podium and that kind of power. The purity culture that we are all subject to gives us the latitude to play that role, to put the fear of God into the person that we think has the authority in that relationship structure. And we've all been brought up, most of us have been brought up. I'll speak for myself. I was brought up that the male had the authority in those relationships, which is why the male is typically the one that gets subjected to that sense of fear by the other dominant male in that relationship. And so deconstructing that sense of purity culture and the protection of a woman's virtue is a lot of work. And I will openly admit that the group that I represent by this collar has been mostly responsible for that sense of trauma. And I want to thank you, Cody, for really looking at what that means in our lives and bringing that up. Thank you. Please.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Timothy Jones. I want to reflect on the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Oh, thank you, Timothy. Thank you.
As a proud gay black man, I have to be honest that I was actually excited, but very pissed off. Pissed off because I felt like I'm glad that we're being seen, but there's a little bit of envy because I lost my career under Don't Ask, Don't Tell and couldn't get it back. Now, the interesting thing about the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell that is amazing is that, yes, they ended Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but they don't talk about the code.
Right.
You might have ended Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but if your code is RE4, you still can't get back into the military. That's something that has not changed, is coding. I say that to talk about my own unconscious bias actually being a male sexual assault survivor. I work for a veteran nonprofit in southwestern PA, and it is our goal to ensure that all veterans are housed, regardless of service, regardless of discharge. And one of the questions that I had to grapple with being a male survivor of sexual assault is that some of my clients are predators. They're lifetime offenders. Some of my clients have done some not so great things. And in order to do my job effectively, I had to ask myself a question. How am I going to serve this veteran with my background?
Mm-hmm.
And I had to ask the same question of why I served. And that was, am I willing to die for the racist individual that would rather see me dead? Am I willing to give that sacrifice for that individual that would rather hurt me versus love me? And when I answered that question, the answer to that question is always absolutely, I would be willing to do that. And so in my role, I grapple with unconscious bias every day, but I bring it to the forefront. And I am reminded that even though what they did, they paid for their own mistakes. And they also need a home. Mm-hmm. And that allows me to do my job not only effectively, but do it to the best of my ability. And so that's something that I wanted to kind of put out there, that it's even the things that you think you've tackled or overcome, you still have to do the work.
Thank you very much, Timothy. Yeah, I was a recruiter for 3 years. Don't hold that against me. I just moonlighted. I didn't really sell anybody a bag of goods, I don't think. And thankfully, none of those sailors still talk to me. So, that RE code, the one that's on your DD-214, is a huge thing, specifically for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And it was something that we fought with. And going through that Court of Appeals with, for us, the Naval Bureau of Records and something, it's a long process. And for victims of sexual assault, I can't imagine the additional layers of trauma that would have come up through even that process, trying to adjudicate a change that was really owed you, specifically because of the repeal of that law, and how unconstitutional it was, and certainly how anti-military service mission it presented. It definitely created divisions and continues to uphold divisions within the veteran culture. And if I may, Timothy, just kind of talk about sexual assault also, and I understand that this is a very triggering topic, but I was the sexual assault victim program coordinator at my last command before I retired. And working through the unconscious biases that I had with victims was very difficult for me, specifically if the victims were male. I was the department chief for a deploying department. I had 324 sailors that were deploying all over the world at any given moment in time. And so male sexual assault was definitely something that my command dealt with maybe a little bit more than other commands. And to kind of recode my response to that, to say that, yeah, that is victimization, that is real, and that is something that actually happens and needs to be addressed. And these victims are no different from any other victims. and then kind of working with the rest of the chiefs in an effort to try to kind of deconstruct with them, how best we can serve these sailors who have had just atrocious things happen to them. That in one case for me, caused them to keep it under wraps for almost 3 years. And it really didn't come back to the surface until that sailor returned to direct support deploying, because it was a trauma that he now actually had to deal with in preparation for doing the mission that he was being called to complete. And so that was a really long road for both of us. And kind of like Tiana, I am thankful for that sailor who really was able to give me the patience to kind of walk with them in that. And be able to provide that level of service to somebody who is going through some really deep pain. And so, Timothy, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I really appreciate, too, your willingness to claim that sense of discomfort you have with working with veterans who are not often represented in groups like this. If we were in the military still, this would be the room of the best and the brightest, the people that that did everything right, that were getting the good evals, and it's really easy to overlook those that struggled, during their military service or became felons, and still this sense of, okay, they still joined, they're still here, they still need help, and if we're not willing to provide services to them, how much worse could it get? And where those opportunities for redemption are. And I think that when we talk about unconscious bias, that's really what it's about. Where are the opportunities for redemption? Where are the opportunities that we have in an effort to lead people into a sense of reconciliation, not just with their own experiences in life, but also with those that are around them? And so I, again, am super excited to have been invited here to have this discussion with you guys, because I feel like this is kind of where that pinnacle of understanding really exists. When we talk about the 1% of those that are eligible to serve the military, and then out of that 1%, those that actually do, as far as national population, what is it that we can bring through our experiences into these realms where those experiences don't exist? And invite other people into conversations about the opportunities that are just part of our reality, in deconstructing and being able to work with people who don't look like us, who didn't grow up like us, and whatever that might be, in an effort to really work together towards a common mission or goal. I'll step down from my soapbox for a moment. Would anybody else like to share? This has been really great, and I hope that those of you who have shared, I definitely feel invited into a sense of understanding about your stories, and I hope that everybody else is too. And so I'll just remind you that this is definitely a safe space, and that this is an invitation into something greater. This is not the end of a conversation, but the beginning of something that we can all take back home. Are there any questions for me or about the topic at hand? Yes?
I guess I just wanted to ask, how would you, by addressing your self-bias, your unconscious biases, what can we do as SBA, with your club, to help, I guess, either navigate those biases or kind of address them more with the veterans that are there?
What's your name?
Oh, Ty.
Ty?
Yeah.
Ty? Thank you, Ty. So just if I understood your question correctly, you're asking basically what are those steps that we can take with unconscious bias back at school or chapters or whatever. And so I am certainly not an expert in this. I think that if our experience here together should tell you anything, it's that I know very little about a lot. And so the few books that I have read in the last 5 years about this really talk about that sense of invitation. And so there's a coupling of accountability and response, right? So if we notice that there are unconscious biases that are coming to the surface in our interactions with other people, in that true that one military thing that has really held for me throughout my life, this understanding of praise in public, berate in private. Pull them aside and have a conversation about what they just said means to them, or what they just did means to them. And invite them into an opportunity to explore with you what that might look like as far as change is concerned. And I understand that is a very nebulous answer to your question. The unfortunate aspect of something that is so ingrained in our psyche is that there's no quick fix. First, we have to have an understanding that it exists. Then we have to point out where those things are becoming harmful or barriers to our ability to coexist. Then we have to start working with that person in an effort to help them deconstruct what those things are. I think as a common theme throughout my sharing and the sharing of our siblings here is those invitations that we received to be able to kind of deconstruct those things together with someone else. And that is really what it's about. If we want to live in a globalized community, if we want to understand that diversity and inclusivity are helpful to the promotion of whatever community it is that we want to live into, we have to be able to kind of do the work in an effort to help people deconstruct those things. And there's no better people in my mind to do that than people who have done that for whatever period of time you served. Because that's really what a lot of us did in an effort to be able to work with a lot of the people that we were assigned to work with, right? Is deconstruct that relationship dynamic to the extent that we could get the mission done for the benefit of the command or the sailors around us or the airmen or soldiers or coasties or whomsoever. Does that help? Okay. No, thank you for the question. I was probably going to completely gloss over the actual ending to this anyway, so Ty, thank you for keeping me on target. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Yes, please.
Not really a question. I just wanted to make the point, in my opinion, was that I don't really have a specific story shared, but to an extent, what I've noticed, unconscious bias is sort of what makes the world go around.
Okay. What's your name? Rob? Thank you, Rob. So Rob was talking about, kind of getting beyond the little things that we've talked about, those individual relationships that we might have, that we have to do that. And so where are we then invited into the larger conversation about societal change? And I think, too, thank you again, Rob, for bringing that up as another capstone to this conversation. How many of you have been involved with any of the activities surrounding the, I don't know how to put this, the reawakening to oppression that exists in this country? Okay. It could be little things, it could be big things, but that is a response directly, Rob, to unconscious bias. That is, looking at the manifestation of the larger picture of how all of those little individual microaggressions and opportunities to really kind of live into these societal trainings that we have been given from children about how each of us is different, and how those differences should be feared, and how that manifests itself into laws, into policies at the government or school level. I'm sure that some of you have been part of colleges that were not great as far as environments are concerned. Yes.
My name is Bill Martinez from the University of Toledo. I just want to comment about the legislations, the laws that are passed that are designed to exclude individuals and separated. And then folks are just, they just going along with it, unconsciously. And so I want to challenge everyone to take a close look at who your congressperson is, who your state representative is, and look at what they're voting on, because it affects you. I recently had to renew my driver's license, and they're saying, oh, well, you can bring in some documents to get federally compliant to travel across the state. What? This is America. You want me to like have an ID so I can cross state lines? That's BS, and it's something that you're just trying to restrict people from voting and not traveling. But if that's the law, how else am I going to get us in there? Right? And so now, for me, it's like, okay, who voted for this? Was it my congressperson? Because I might write them a letter, you know? And so it's really encouraged me and motivated me to like pay attention to the political climate, not just nationally, but in my local community. Because these folks, you don't just get to Congress overnight.
Mm-hmm.
They start off on the school boards and the city councils, you know? And they start off as unconscious folks, like, oh, this is just a part in politics, and this is just the way the laws are passed, and, you know, these are the values of my constituents, you know, and so they just continue to advance, and go up and up and up. And suddenly there's like, yeah, well, we need to pass this law because, you know, if we don't pass this law, then, you know, it's going to affect our voter base, and we might not get reelected. So let's do some gerrymandering, let's do some voter restriction. You know, it's sickening.
Yeah.
And so we have to realize at our level in our communities, we have to become conscious to it. And what you were saying, deconstructing unconscious bias is very difficult, is very challenging, and it takes patience. And that is one thing we as Americans do not. We enjoy instant gratification, right? We can't get grand if it's not instant. You know? So people, folks just don't want to challenge themselves. It takes research. It takes some real introspective and conversation with others that you're close with, your friends and family, and say, hey, maybe I just don't understand, you know, what's going on, or maybe I don't understand this person's culture, or just why things the way they are. We need to talk about it.
Absolutely.
And it's difficult.
Thank you very much, Phil. Thank you. I appreciate you highlighting that distinction when unconscious bias becomes conscious, and how we're experiencing that as a society, specifically through the legislature, and the things that we need to focus on in an effort to really look at how to dismantle and deconstruct that sense of people's unconscious acceptance of what those conscious biases bring. So thank you again very much for that. I appreciate your passion. Please. Yes?
Hi, I'm really just getting my late father.
No
My
problem.
name's Jim. I'm from CSU Stanislaus, California. And I do not want to upset any particular group, but our state legislator passed a state bill that basically placed 19 states on a blacklist because in that state assembly's mind, they're discriminatory towards the LGBT.
QIA plus?
Yeah, hold on. Okay, I called me out with soup, I'm sorry.
Broad spectrum.
And the thing is that what it did is like 4 of my other members couldn't raise the money to come here because that bill prevents the schools from getting access to state funds, which are our state taxes.
Sure.
And it was like passed in the middle of the night and nobody knew about the bill. And the thing that really frustrates me is we try to get a hold of your assembly person, or we try to get a hold of your state congressman or
Sure.
You know, and then I'm thinking, we put our lives on the line for this country to have and get the reps, basically, because I'm retired Navy. And when all this crap started last year with January 6th and, you know, all the feelings around the election and stuff, I actually got a email from the government reminding me about, I think it's Article 133 about speech,
Mm-hmm.
that if I publicly come out and say something that they consider being unlawful by the UCMJ, that they can pull me after 40 years in the military, or being retired for 20 years, that they can pull me back in and strip me of all my rights.
Sure.
But yet you got congressmen, there degrading the president of the United States. And to me, those biases are just as important as all the other biases, because they need to be talked about, or we're going to have another situation.
Mm-hmm.
But, I grew up in California, I grew up in San Francisco, and I only knew one color, okay? And that was the rainbow color of the 60s, okay? I'm 63 or 62 years old. Yeah, I remember Haight-Ashbury and all, I do drugs back then. But, I mean, you have...
Would your recruiter agree with you?
Well, you were a recruiter, so you would enjoy this story.
Well, if you wouldn't mind, could you share that story afterwards?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is that when we go in, we're taught to respect the Constitution of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And the unconscious bias that I have is that I always thought that when everybody raised their hand, they were going to be honored. And now the bias is up forward that they ain't honest.
Right. And I think to a large extent that has a lot to do with the discomfort we have about challenging people when those things rear their ugly heads, right? If we allow an unconscious bias to continue, the silence is compliance, or what's the other one about acceptance? I can't remember. It's an old senior chief thing. Basically, if you saw somebody wandering around with their hands in their pockets and you didn't say anything, you basically were saying it was okay. And so this idea of being able to challenge our peers, to be able to challenge those that have authority over us, is really emerging, I think, at a fever pitch. And I think that there's an opportunity here for those of us who have sometimes fought the authority that was placed over us to the benefit of those around us, to continue to do that work. Yes, Timothy.
I just wanted to,
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to add, I love what you just said. There is a shift taking place right now, and what I am seeing is similar to what I saw with LGBTQ, with our movement. Our movement shifted because our message shifted. Our message shifted from, you must love us, you must accept us, you have to do this, to, we just want our basic rights. Mm-hmm. What I'm seeing is, even the BLM movement, our movement is shifted with our message. And it's weird that I just heard this a few months ago, just about conversation. Racism is not a black issue. Racism is a white issue that white people must fix, not a black issue that you must empathize with. I have not heard that until this year, but it is so true because it goes into power. You can reclaim your power because you can have these conversations. These are conversations that I cannot have. I don't know your family members, you don't know mine, but I can engage with them. There's biases with everyone, but we have to go with the message. This is an issue that can be fixed, but it can be fixed at our level. It doesn't have to go all the way up to Congress. You're correct where that is a conscious bias, and that they are also preying on the unconscious bias that exists and the fear. But once you change the message to then put it back onto where it should be, it's not about why Black Lives Matter and they're protesting and how they're protesting. No, what is happening in the laws that are being created in the families that are still perpetuating this issue. I loved what you said, and I wanted to just add into there what can be done. We are doing it right now. We are in these rooms. What's going to happen when you go back to your campus? What's going to happen when you go back to your community? And how are you going to be the change to move this conversation forward? I just wanted to add that layer there.
Thank you, Timothy. Thank you.
So I actually just wanted to add a little bit onto that. I am in an interracial relationship, and I live in a neighborhood that is predominantly black. And I'm raising a 13-year-old girl who looks Puerto Rican. But unfortunately, the flag that I hear isn't from the people that look like me. The whispers that I hear are oh, she's too good to get a black man. She's too good. She doesn't want that. And that's also the issue. It's not just the white needs to be fixed. Everyone needs to be fixed. Because if there's no change on either side, everyone needs to fix. Because if it's just one side changing and the other side not wanting to come back, then what's all the work that I'm gonna do?
What's your name?
Michael.
Michael, thank you. Thank you, Michael. I think you raise a good point in really highlighting and underscoring that we all have unconscious bias. There is not a single one of us in this room that doesn't suffer from some level of unconscious bias, whether it is something as inane as octopus sushi or something as great as a skin color barrier that we have in living a life in a far more diverse world than the one that I grew up in. And so yes, there are opportunities there for everyone to invite anyone else into those conversations. And like Phil, I also challenge you to do those things. It is definitely something that is needed in our society as we grow up and bring children into this world, whether, whatever gender they might be, in an effort to honor who they are and what we can give them as a society in an effort to make things as safe and inclusive and diverse as possible. And so I just want to thank all of you who shared today. I want to thank all of you who came today to this conversation, and just thank you. It was very life-giving for me, and I hope that everyone gets to walk out of here with something today, and just continue to do great things, and thank you for your service.